Okay, well, I'm a psychologist by training, so I'm interested in the relationship of psychological variables to psi phenomena. And there are two basic questions. A first question in the case of ESP, how's the information get from the source to the receiver? That's basically a physics question. Where a psychologist comes in is what happens once it gets there. How is it processed? How does it get from the from the unconscious mind to the conscious mind? And I'm particularly interested in that, and particularly interested in the barriers to that. In other words, what prevents the unconscious material from getting into consciousness. And then I'm also interested in studying unconscious responses. It's a good way to avoid the problem. But I would say in the general sense, I'm just interested in the psychology of psi. Well, I'm actually between projects now. I think I would go back to a project I did a couple of years ago, which is really very closely related to my current interest overall, and really ties back into how I answered the previous question. And then I'm proposing a process of sending in a grant proposal for a follow-up on that. And the premise of it is that basically psi is interfered with by higher cognitive processes. That's saying what blocks it. And I think there are a number of ways you can answer that from different perspectives, but a lot of it is cognitive processes, including imagery. And I think psi is most effective if you can get those processes out of the way. And a lot of procedures that's part of what something like the Ganzfeld was supposed to do. A lot of these older state inductions are designed to get that kind of processing out of the way, particularly linear kinds of thought. And so I became interested in used to be called motor automatisms, where it's really behavior and sort of minimally mediated, at least by conscious cognition. And I guess the prototypical example of that would be automatic writing or the Ouija board. No, that's a hard one for me because I'm kind of compulsive type, and the aspect where I really get wrapped up in it is when I'm trying to solve a problem. And that's usually either in terms of how to design the study, how to overcome some kind of problem, and then how to make sense of the results. And when I get on that, I really get very frustrated. I don't have an answer, so I'm just very motivated to kind of stay immersed in it. I'm not looking for a break. I get the break when I get the answer to my question.
I guess that's the answer to this question then.
Yeah, and then the other aspect of that is a lot of times one way I can take a break, more in the sense that you mean it, and sort of stay involved, as I'm obsessed with stay involved with the study, is do something mindless like data entry. And that's, for me, that's almost like a kind of meditation. And it's kind of a release from more complex cognitive activity. It's just, just kind of put stuff in. It's kind of relaxing in a strange sort of way. And it is kind of you can almost think of it as taking a break from the more heavily intellectual components of it. Yeah, Yeah, I actually wrote a couple of papers on this, actually, and I talked a little bit about it this morning, too. I would answer that in two ways. First of all, before you get in the field, you got to ask yourself, do you really want to do this? And one thing I've noticed, I don't know a study on this, but there's a very high negative correlation between interest in psychic things and interest in science. And a lot of people say, hey, that would be a neat thing to study. I want to study how do you study, you be a scientist, or you train to be a scientist. But you need to really ask yourself what being a scientist entails, apart from being a parapsychologist. For one thing, you have to adopt what I was talking about this morning, the scientific epistemology. So, if you're really wedded to the idea that the only way you're going to learn about psi is sit down and meditate and look within, like these transpersonal people, you do not want to be a scientist. You ask yourself that question. If your answer isn't, can you accept the scientific epistemology as a valid way to get knowledge in this area? Now, you can also think there are both. I mean, it's okay if you think in addition to science, but if you're one of these people that you see in a lot in transpersonal psychology who think that the scientific methodology is a waste of time, you need to recognize that initially before you start making any commitment. Otherwise, you're going to get into, you're just going to keep this as all crap and get into all kinds of complaining and bitching about it. So, understand what being a scientist entails, and is that really what you want? Also, scientists need to be a bit obsessive. Being obsessive compulsive is actually a good trait for a scientist to have up to the point at which it becomes pathological. And you particularly need to have attention to detail. If you're one of these people who are interested in the big picture, don't be a scientist. You may want to be a theoretical physicist or something, but don't be a practicing scientist unless you're comfortable with the nitty-gritty. Just putting data in, be sure you're doing it right. Really requires attention to detail, and you need a certain amount of patience for that sort of thing. And if that's your temperament, don't go into science. Okay, if you decided that you want to be a scientific parapsychologist and you've passed all those tests, then, as I said this morning, I think, particularly with the lack of opportunities for formal education in parapsychology, I think you need to pick a mainstream science that interests you, and almost any science can be relevant to parapsychology. Some more than others. Are probably psychology and physics, psychology and neuroscience maybe the most relevant, and then maybe after that physics, after that anthropology. Geology probably isn't all that relevant. Find which of the relevant fields you want to get into. I say psychology is probably the most relevant, and even if that's not your major, I would take some training in experimental and particularly experimental and cognitive psychology. But you're probably going to, whatever excites you in the mainstream world is probably where you're going to do the best work in parapsychology. So, figure that you're going to approach it from that point of view. And despite what I said this morning, I think I really didn't represent my own position terribly well. I do think there are a lot of various aspects in parapsychology that you really need specialized training in parapsychology. And so I think you should seek those out to the degree that you can get it, and recognize that you need it. There are certain, the main problem, a lot of people come into this field cold, and their main problem is they don't know what they don't know. They think they know how to do things, and they really don't, and they end up embarrassing themselves and the field in the process. So you need to recognize that you need science, that you need basic scientific training. And a lot goes back into having the right value system too. That's very important and interacts with all this. And then most people think it's a good idea, because it's so hard to get a job in parapsychology, that what a lot of people do is they establish themselves in a field. Get to the point, at least to the point where they get tenure, they can't fire you, and at this point reveal your interest in parapsychology. Probably the best example of that is Ian Stevenson, the guy who studied reincarnation. He became chairman of the psychiatry department at the University of Virginia before he let on he was interested in this stuff. I don't have a good answer to it. I think I could give you a good answer to a slightly different question. So I'm going to ask your permission to rephrase it into the question of, what question do you hope people won't ask, but they really should? And this gives me an opportunity to bring in my interest in experimenter psi, which I think is responsible. I have written some papers on this. And the at least quasi-embarrassing question somebody might answer is, if you think experimenter psi is so dominant, why do you design your study, such as the one I told you earlier, under the premise that it's these subjects that are producing it? And this is a kind of a difficult one for me. And part of it is I don't really know of a good way to test experimenter psi. It creates some very difficult problems. In a way, it's one of these sort of existential questions, kind of like survival, which I don't think you'll ever be able to answer conclusively. You can only get results that are tipped in one direction or the other. And so of course, if I really, and also, I don't think I'm that psychic myself. At least that's what I try to convince myself of. So I'm not really having, so I really don't think I have that much input. I mean, my view in that is not really that it's all experimenter psi. People in the field tend to be in two camps. It's either all the subjects and none of the experimenter, or it's all the experimenter and none of the subjects. And I think it's really a combination of the two. I have a model that it's psi success or hits or psi output is a function of motivation times ability. And if either one of those is zero, you don't get anything.